Welcome all the students of EMC 16. I am Professor Dr. Abid Ahmed. I am taking the class on regulation of respiration. My dear students, you already learned the topics of few lectures, and you already know that what is respiration, what are the mechanism of respiration. Now my topic is regulation of respiration, that is how the respiration is regulated. Now regulation of respiration, actually respiration is regulated by the nervous system, that is nervous system regulates respiration. Again, nervous system is affected by the chemical factors. Now chemical factors is again affected by the non-respiratory factors. Now next question, what are the non-respiratory factors? Non-respiratory factors, for example, that is the exercise increases the carbon dioxide in our body and decreases the oxygen in our body, and this increased carbon dioxide and decreased oxygen, they regulate the nervous system for regulation of respiration. That means it is the prime regulatory system, that is the nervous regulatory system. It is affected by the chemical factors, and chemical factors again affected by the non-respiratory factors. What is the non-respiratory factors example? This is the exercise. Now regulation of respiration. What are the, I already told it, that is the exercise. It is the non-respiratory factors that affect the chemical factors, that is increased carbon dioxide and hydrogen ion that increase the strength of inspiration and expiratory signals to the respiratory muscles. Oxygen in contrast act on the peripheral chemoreceptors for control of regulation. What is the information from these lines? That is carbon dioxide, that is hydrogen, directly stimulate the inspiratory center, but oxygen at first they stimulate the peripheral chemoreceptors for control of respiration, and from peripheral chemoreceptors then inspiration stimulation goes to the respiratory center. Now nervous regulation is controlled by the respiratory center. What is respiratory center? Respiratory center are the group of neurons located bilaterally in the medulla oblongata at the pons of the brainstem. That is, respiratory centers are the group of neurons. Now name of the respiratory center: dorsal respiratory group of neuron, ventral respiratory group of neuron, and pneumotaxic center. Now location of the respiratory center. Respiratory centers are located in the brainstem, that is in medulla and pons. Dorsal respiratory group of neurons are located in the dorsal portion of the medulla. Ventral respiratory group of neurons are located in the ventral part of the medulla, and pneumotaxic center is located in the upper pons. Now look at the diagram. That is, this is the brainstem, this is pons, and this is the medulla. In the medulla there are two types of the respiratory center: dorsal respiratory group of neuron and ventral respiratory group of neuron. In the pons upper part, pneumotaxic center. Now some physiologists agree that there is another respiratory center at the lower part of the pons known as the apneustic center, but the presence of this apneustic center is now also in question mark. Now next one, that is the location, functions and of respiratory center. Dorsal respiratory group of neuron. It extends whole length of the medulla. Most of the neurons are located within the nucleus of tractus solitarius, although additional neurons are located in the adjacent reticular substance of the medulla. That is, dorsal respiratory group of neuron location, nucleus tractus solitarius, and also the reticular substance of the medulla. Now what are the functions of dorsal respiratory group of neuron? The basic rhythm of respiration is generated mainly in the dorsal respiratory group of neurons. Dorsal respiratory group of neurons plays the most fundamental role in the control of respiration. It controls inspiration and of respiratory rhythm. That is, dorsal respiratory group of rhythm, it controls the basic rhythm of respiration. Now, ventral respiratory group of neuron located in each side of the medulla, about 5 millimeter anterior and lateral to the dorsal respiratory group of neuron. These neurons are found in the nucleus ambiguous rostrally and nucleus retroambiguous caudally. That means in it is nucleus ambiguous. Rostrally it is present in the nucleus ambiguous, and caudally it is present in the nucleus retroambiguous. Now, what are the functions? Ventral respiratory group of neurons functions in both inspiration and expiration. Now, pneumotaxic center. Pneumotaxic center located dorsally in the nucleus parabrachialis of the upper pons. Pneumotaxic center transmits signals to the inspiratory area. The primary effect of the center is to control the switch of point of the inspiratory group, thus controlling the duration of the filling phase of the lung. The center limit inspiration, thus control the rate of respiration. Now, what are the in details the functions of pneumotaxic center? Pneumotaxic signals, when it is strong, inspiration lasts as little as 0.5 seconds, thus filling the lungs only slightly. When the pneumotaxic signal is weak, inspiration might continue for 5 or more seconds, thus filling the lungs with a great excess of air. That means stimulation of the pneumotaxic center, it shortens the or it decreases the time of inspiration. When there is decrease of time of inspiration, then there is increased rate of respiration. That is, excess stimulation of pneumotaxic center increases respiratory rate, decreased stimulation of the pneumotaxic center decreases the respiratory rate. That means pneumotaxic center limit the or control the respiratory rate. Strong pneumotaxic signal can increase the rate of breathing 30 to 40 breaths per minute, whereas the weak pneumotaxic signal may reduce the rate only 3 to 5 breaths per minute. You know that a normal respiratory rate is 16 to 18 breaths per minute, but strong pneumotaxic signal can increase it up to 30 to 40 breaths per minute. Now, neurons of the ventral respiratory group of neurons almost totally inactive during normal quiet respiration. That means a ventral respiratory group of neurons actually they doesn't work in normal quiet breathing. They are stimulated only during increased ventilatory condition, that is during exercise. And why there is expiration? Due to elastic recoil of the lungs and thoracic cage. When the respiratory drive for increased pulmonary ventilation becomes greater than normal, respiratory signals spill over in the ventral respiratory neurons from the basic oscillating mechanism of the dorsal respiratory area. That means when there is need of increased respiration as in exercise, then the stimulation spills, that is cross over from dorsal to the ventral respiratory group of neuron. Now that is excess respiratory drive needs the involvement of the ventral respiratory group of neuron. That means ventral respiratory group of neuron do not participate in the basic rhythmical oscillation. Basic rhythmical oscillation or basic rhythm of respiration is performed by the dorsal respiratory group of neuron. Now, for example, during heavy exercise, when there is high level of pulmonary ventilation, then the neurons of the ventral respiratory group of neurons are stimulated. Lung inflation signal limit inspiration, the Herring-Brewer reflex. That means a reflex. What is the stimulus for this reflex? Lung inflation. Now, Herring-Brewer reflex, when the lung become overly inflated, the stretch receptors activate an appropriate feedback response that switches off the inspiratory ramp and thus stops further inspiration. This is called the Herring-Brewer inflation reflex. This reflex also increases the rate of respiration, as is true for signal from the pneumotaxic center. That means in Herring-Brewer reflex, when there is over inflation, that is increased volume of the lungs with hyperventilation, then the receptors in the lungs that limit the inspiration and stops the inspiration. This is called Herring-Brewer inflation reflex. That is, what is the stimulation for Herring-Brewer reflex? It is the overinflation of the lungs. Now, which receptors limit this inspiration? That is the stretch receptors present in the lungs. Now, importance of Herring-Brewer reflex. In human, Herring-Brewer reflex probably is not activated until the tidal volume increases to more than 3 times normal. You know that tidal volume is 0.5 liter. It's 3 times, that is 1.5 liter. And when this tidal volume increases above 1.5 liter, then there is initiation of the Herring-Brewer reflex. What is the importance of this reflex? This reflex is the protective mechanism for preventing excess lung inflation rather than an important ingredient in normal control of ventilation. Nervous signal that is transmitted to the inspiratory muscles, mainly the diaphragm, is not an instantaneous burst of action potential. Instead, it becomes weakly and increases steadily in a ramp manner for about 2 seconds in normal respiration. You know that the basic rhythm of respiration is in the dorsal respiratory group of neurons. But you must know what is the pattern of transmission of impulse from this dorsal respiratory group of neurons to the inspiratory muscles, that is mainly the diaphragm. It is not instantaneous burst of action potential, that is, there is no sudden action potential, but it begins weakly and increases steadily in a ramp manner. That is, action potential increases at first weakly and then steadily and suddenly stops for 2 seconds. 2 seconds, that is in inspiration. Then after 2 seconds, expiration takes place by passive process. Then it ceases abruptly for about next 3 seconds, which turns off the excitation of the diaphragm and allows elastic recoil of the lungs and the chest wall to cause expiration. Next, inspiratory signals begins again for another cycle. These cycles repeat again and again with expiration occurring in between. Thus, the inspiratory signal is a ramp signal. That is, what is ramp signal? Ramp signal, it is for inspiration, because the inspiratory signal, we know that inspiration is an active process and quiet expiration is a passive process. Therefore, for 2 seconds, that is the duration of inspiration, the action potential is weak and it rises in steady way, that is by step, and after 2 seconds it suddenly stops, and there is expiration, that is the dance of the excitation of the diaphragm and elastic recoil of the lungs and chest to cause the expiration. What is the advantage of REM signal? Advantage of the REM signal is that it causes a steady increase in volume of the lungs during inspiration rather than inspiratory gaps. That means during inspiration there is not sudden cessation of inspiration, because there is there is steady and weak stimulation of the inspiration, and then there is passive process, that is expiration. Thanks for your attention. Thank you very much.